let's get into the video here. One of my favorite top 5 videos we're ever going to film because it involves some of my favorite guns of all time. I don't know if you guys have noticed throughout the channel, but I like older historical firearms, particularly American firearms, because America. I gotta tell you, today sitting in front of me, I have 5 of my favorite guns of all time, not just the 5 most iconic. We're going to base this list off what I think was the most influential throughout history, maybe what was the most successful, what started certain genres of firearms, and overall what had the biggest impact throughout history, according to my opinion. Let's get into it right now with number 5, one of my favorite guns of all time. It's been seen on the channel several times, and it is the Winchester 1873. Now the Winchester 1873 is kind of an old gun. I don't know if you're getting the gist of it, but it was released in 1873 and it's about 150 years old. That being said, it still is effective today, which is pretty crazy if you really think about it. I mean, how much stuff is really effective 150 years later? You wouldn't drive a 150-year-old car, but you damn sure can use a 150-year-old rifle. Now, the lever action was one of the first repeating rifles. That has a pretty big impact. I don't know if you're aware of this, but around 1860 or so, when the 1860 Henry was released, which was a really, really close candidate to get on this list, by the way. I just think the Winchester has a couple of features that make it a little bit better. It was going up against muskets. So you're talking about 16 rounds or so of repeat fire against essentially a muzzle loader. So when you're talking about the 1873, you're talking about in a span of 13 years, they went from muzzle loaders to this. They called it the rifle you can load on Sunday and shoot all week, and that's for a good reason. This is a 16-inch barrel, but they predominantly came in 20 and 24-inch barrels, which allowed you to load anywhere from 10 all the way up to 15 to even 20 cartridges, depending on the caliber, which is a lot of rounds by comparison to 1 per minute. The way the lever action works is you load the rounds into the loading gate here, which is an upgrade the Winchester had over the predecessors that Henry's used to load into the tube, which works, but not near as well as the loading gate. The loading gate works really well because even in prone, you can continue to top off the rifle while you're being suppressed, like under suppressing fire and that kind of thing. And then you can pop up and you can use the unbelievably smooth action of the 1873, which is one of the reasons why this gun actually is still used in competition today. As you can see there, it has an amazing single action trigger brake. You shouldn't drop it on an empty cylinder like that all the time, but I'm just doing it for video purposes, so. On top of that, the Winchester is extremely reliable. So it's very slick, very reliable, and carries a high magazine capacity, especially for its era, making it the first repeating carbine ever designed. One of the awesome parts about the Winchester 1873 was it originally came out in the 4440 cartridge, which was the first center fire cartridge to ever be used by a rifle. Now, you guys are really used to that in guns like this. However, if you would consider the unbelievable upgrade that this was to a lot of the rifles to its day, not only did it have center fire cartridges that you can load in there, but it also had a ton of them that you could put down range really quickly. A number of upgrades were done to this to upgrade it from the original Henry. One of those being the loading gate, another being the dust cover, so you can cover it up for adverse conditions. And I don't know if you've rode around on a horse in the Old West, but there's an awful lot of adverse conditions to be had, so that was a really nice feature. It also comes with adjustable buckhorn sights, which are accurate way past what you think they would be accurate. I can shoot this rifle up to 200 yards, which is extremely impressive considering when this rifle came out, and you wouldn't think that would be applicable, but around this time the little bighorn happened and engagement distances were out to 1,000 yards, making this a very viable gun for its era. One of the nice things about the 1873 is not only its good looks, coming with the case-hardened receiver and the walnut stock and foregrip there, but also because this gun is actually legal in a lot of states where maybe guns like the AR or other guns are not, and that makes this a very viable self-defense weapon for anybody who can't get a hold of something more modern. The best thing about it, in my opinion, though, other than the looks, is going to be the ease of use. Now, you wouldn't think these would be easy to use, but if you've ever seen anything like the Riflemen or any of the Old West movies, I mean, I knew how to use this rifle before I even touched one, and my first lever action was actually a Henry, and I got it when I was 12 years old, so that really tells you something. All you do is load them into the loading port, rack the lever, and you're off to the races. Really easy to use, even for a beginner, and it makes a pretty cool wall hanger as well. This one actually hangs above my TV. For number 4 here, we have the Thompson. Now this is my Thompson. This is a semi-automatic version, and it is a remake from the original. This is made by the same company though. This is an auto ordnance design, and you can get these still today. Now the Thompson is a extremely unique and well-known firearm, not just because of its looks, but because of pop culture. The Thompson originally was designed, I think, around 1918. It didn't go into production until 1921. The auto ordnance company at the time did not have the manufacturing capability to make the gun, so they pawned it off to Colt, and Colt made a whole bunch of them, which they sold over the next few decades. Now the gun didn't sell all that well because it came in around $200, and back then that was extremely expensive. I mean, you're talking about like a quarter of a house, maybe half a car, something like that. $200 in the 1920s was very expensive. So not only was it very expensive, but there wasn't a whole lot of people who really knew about it. So most of the people that used it were police and people that worked at government buildings and stuff like that. The thing that really popularized the Thompson was pop culture. It was the gangsters of the era, it was the dime novels, and it was the movies that it was actually featured in. It got it really famous because of its iconic looks and because there was nothing else around that would even come close to it. When the Thompson was designed, you're talking about shortly after World War I, and it ended up being the first submachine gun ever made. World War I was a war that involved a lot of trench warfare, so they were looking for a gun that was a lot smaller than your standard bolt-action rifle like a 1903 Springfield. Coincidentally, General Thompson, the guy who invented the gun, was actually involved in the 1903 Springfield project, so he knew a lot about it, and he knew what he was trying to get into and what he was trying to make. They wanted something that soldiers could jump into a trench with, handle everything that was in there relatively easily without a very large cumbersome rifle or a small melee weapon, which was the predominant weapon of World War I, which is pretty horrifying if you really think about it. So the Thompson was born, and it fires the same caliber that the 1911 used, which was the sidearm for the US military at the time. Made a lot of sense. It was based off the Blish concept, which never really worked out. However, it did end up making this bad boy, which is a blowback operated .45 caliber submachine gun. Now, there's a lot of iconic features on the Thompson, or the Tommy gun, the 1921, which are absent on the M1A1, which is the version that I have here, including a compensator, several other things. However, this one did come with the adjustable sight, which they did get rid of during World War II. The reason for that is, as I said, the Thompson was an extremely expensive gun, and after the 1910s, 1920s, there were other submachine guns available, just not available to the US. So the US continued to contract these and pay crazy amounts of money for them just because they were needed in World War II. And eventually, in the 1940s, they decided enough's enough, and they cut a bunch of parts out and had Savage make them for a lot less. Pretty cool, however, and the Thompson, although it wasn't widely received overall, most of the people that carried them really liked them. The only con to the gun is it's extremely heavy for what it is. I mean, you're talking about a .45 caliber carbine, which weighs 10 to 12 pounds, depending on how you configure it. So carrying the damn thing wasn't awesome, but looking at it and firing it is really cool. I've had the opportunity to fire these at machine gun shoots, and they do ride up quite a bit, but it is one hell of a time. If you had the opportunity, I would absolutely recommend it. Now, these were phased out after World War II, however, they were still made for civilians, and they were phased out by really a superior design in the grease gun, which is a much simpler and much uglier gun. However, it does function better, and that gun actually served for a really long time. That gun served from after World War II all the way into like Desert Storm and stuff, because they were really good with suppressors and things like that. But that's for another day. In at number 3, we have one of the most beautiful and iconic firearms, not just ever made in America, but ever made across the entire world. This is the Colt Single Action Army 1873. This is my version here. This is an engraved Generation 3 in .357 Magnum, and this is absolutely my baby of my collection, and part of the reason why we did this video is because I could show this off to you, flex a little bit. I really like this gun, one of my favorite guns when I was a kid, and still to this day. Just like the standard cavalry versions that the military used to use, this has the full 7.5-inch barrel. However, they were made with several other barrel lengths, including 5 and 4-inch, for different purposes and different uses. It holds 6 rounds. It was originally designed in .45 Colt. However, I think it's made in almost 30 calibers. Speaking of that, Colt actually ended the production of this twice and brought it back both times because of the popularity of the gun. The gun was developed by Colt engineers William Mason and Charles Brinkoff Richards. Big ups to them. Thank you for bringing one of the most iconic guns in history into the fold. Now, if you're wondering why Colt didn't bring a cartridge revolver to the scene sooner, it's actually because Smith & Wesson had a patent on cartridges for quite a while, and I think it was like 1869, 1870, something like that, was the first time Colt was allowed to use cartridges in a revolver, and when they came out with this, they made a hell of a splash. I've got 2 guns, one for each of you. The gun served from 1873 all the way to 1892 in many, many branches of the government, and over 300,000 were made in the next 70 years, making it one of, if not the most popular revolver of the Old West. Certainly the most iconic. Part of that actually has to do with pop culture. These guns had a lot of competition back in the day, including Remington, Smith & Wesson, a lot of good revolver designs, and a lot of good single-action revolver designs. However, the Colt really ran the silver screen, and because of that, everybody wanted a Colt, everybody started buying Colt, and very soon after that, single-action designs from other companies were phased out, and only Colt was left. Now, the Colt was used so widely through service, not just because of its good looks, of course. It was used because it had a very reliable overall design, a very robust action that worked well in adverse conditions, and it was extremely accurate. As you can see in the footage here, I can engage targets up to 75 or even 100 yards with this gun, even though it's 150 years old, making it still to this day a viable weapon, and again, that's pretty impressive. In at number 2, one of the most widely produced American rifles in history, and arguably the best, I consider it the best. This is the Armalite rifle, or should I say the AR-15. Now, the AR-15 was designed in the 1960s by Eugene Stoner, one of the greatest gun makers of all time, and certainly a visionary guy. Made several other designs other than the AR-15 as well. Now, the AR-15 is a direct gas impingement semi-automatic rifle, generally chambered in 5.56 or 223. However, it is chambered in every freaking caliber on earth, pretty much at this point, anywhere from 300 Blackwell to 6.8. You can even get larger versions like the AR-10 and 308, which is actually the original design, by the way. But you can get so many different calibers in this, it'll really make your head spin. On top of that, it just happens to be the most modular and ergonomic rifle ever designed. Standard models originally were made with a 20-inch barrel. However, the standard model today is 16. You can get them in 14.5, 11. You can get them in pistol versions. You can get them in 24-inch bull barrels, pretty much whatever the hell you want. And you can get them for whatever use you want. If you're looking for long-range shooting, you can get a very long-range, heavy caliber AR. If you're looking for CQB, you can get a 10.5, 5.56. You can get it for whatever flavor that you're into. Now, another awesome thing about the AR-15 is because it has a direct impingement design, it has extremely low recoil. On top of that, the bullet itself, it was originally designed to be very lightweight in a very lightweight rifle, especially considering that the service rifle at the time this was adopted was the M14. So as you can see, this is my Bravo Company AR. This is one of my overall favorites. This thing has, I don't know, an unreal amount of rounds through it. I think something like 10 or 12,000 over the few years that I've had it. Now, I shoot a lot more than most people. But the nice thing about the AR is not only does it have long-term durability if it's made by really good people, but it's extremely reliable, and it's one of the most inherently accurate rifles ever designed. Even rack grade $300 to $600 ARs will shoot 3 MOA groups, which is really impressive. The overall lifespan of an AR, if you get a high quality one, is really good. And if it's not, it's one of the most popular rifles, and because of that, it has so many aftermarket parts that whatever part would ever break, you could easily find in any gun store. The ammunition is available, the magazines are available, at least more available than everything else. I mean, this is 2021 after all, and it just makes it the obvious choice for almost anybody who wants an intermediate caliber rifle. Not just one of the most influential and popular rifles in the United States, but it's in the top 5 most influential rifles in the world. I mean, the only things I can think that might be more influential are maybe the STG-44, maybe the AK, the Mauser, stuff like that. However, as far as American guns go, the AR-15 really is the standard in my personal opinion, and certainly the right arm of the free world. Honorable mentions that I could probably make like a top 20 of these, but I'll just try to cut them short and get my favorites. Let's go with that. So the first honorable mention is going to be the M1 Garand. It would have been number 6 on this list if there were 6, but there wasn't, so it's an honorable mention. Another one's going to be the 1903 Springfield. Of course, the Remington 870, Mossberg 500, because you can't mention the Remington 870 without mentioning the Mossberg 500. Smith & Wesson Model 29. Come on, Dirty Harry gun. That was so close to making the list as well. One of my personal favorites. I actually got to shoot one about a month ago, and we're going to get one for review. Obviously the Sharps and the Smith & Wesson Military and Police Special, which certainly would have made a top 10 considering it's probably the most time-tested and proven revolver of all time. That being said, let's get into number 1 here. I bet you can guess what it is. What do you think it is? It's the 1911. Of course it's the 1911. This is, after all, the greatest gun ever made by a man. That man was John Moses Browning, and he's the greatest gun maker of all time. Not just because of the 1911, although that would certainly still put him at number one. It's because he invented a whole bunch of other guns as well, including the Browning Auto 5, the Browning High Power, and the list goes on and on and on and on. You wouldn't believe the amount of different actions that are in guns today and different guns that were influential throughout history that John Moses Browning made. If you want to see a top 5 Browning guns, let me know in the comment section below as well, but we'll stick with just the 1911 for now. The first patents on the 1911 actually began in 1896, where John Browning invented the tilting barrel design, which would later be used in the 1911. The 1911 itself is a single action design. What that means is the hammer has to be cocked to the rear in order to fire, and the original guns did have a manual safety, but they did not have a grip safety. Now, this is a single action gun that was chambered in .45 initially. However, just like all the other popular guns on this list, has been chambered in almost every caliber since then. Being over 110 years later, this gun is still in use by some of the best military forces in the world. Now, the 1911 was originally designed to be extremely modular, so every part on this gun was meant to be put in a bin and put together with another part, making it one of the first modular guns that ever existed. It, again, had started the tilting barrel design, which is used in pretty much every gun. They're still used by competition shooters all around the world, especially the 2011. If you're worried about capacity, now the 1911 has a 7-round capacity in .45. You can bump that up to 8. You can go to 9mm and bump that up to 11, or you can go to a 2011 like the Staccato, which I carry, and you can go all the way up to 27. So people can tell you a capacity is an issue with the 1911, but just bump that number up one to a 2011 and you could run 27-round mags and make those Glock fanboys cry. Now, the grip safety was a later addition, and you got to remember this gun was designed when people were still riding horses. I mean, I shit you not, this part of this gun was designed for cavalry. The original 1911 had a 5-inch barrel, just like this beautiful Wilson Combat here. However, they can actually come in a whole bunch of different barrel lengths, all the way from tiny little subcompacts, all the way out to long-barreled guns designed specifically for accuracy. Now, I mentioned that it had a great trigger, but I can't stress that enough. The 1911 trigger is not only the lightest trigger that you're going to run into, but it's actually the fastest reset as well. So if you can see here, that's an unbelievable trigger. The reason why most people miss is trigger control. It actually allows you to get better hits with this gun than you get with most other guns. If you were to hand this gun to other shooters that are used to a Glock, generally they shoot this better. And the reason for that is going to be that very short trigger takes away a lot of the issues with people have with trigger pull. Trigger control is the most important fundamental when it comes to marksmanship, and the 1911 just allows you to cheat that a little bit, and you can just get better hits on target with this gun, which is why people opt for it even though it has a lower capacity. High-end guns like this Wilson Combat or maybe an Atlas Gunworks or Staccato, those guns are guaranteed at 2 inches at 50 yards. That's an incredible accuracy even for a rifle, let alone a handgun. All that aside, trigger, accuracy, long service life, reliability, all that good stuff aside, you're still left with one of the most beautiful guns that has ever been made, and one of the guns that is the most popular, if not the most popular gun through pop culture. So I don't understand how this couldn't be the best American gun, but you let me know what you think in the comment section below. I'd love to see your guys' list. I'd love to see what you would have added that I didn't put on, maybe a Barrett 50, something like that, just for fun. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. Please support your local homeless shelters, and remember to recycle. I'll check you later. I want to say thanks to everybody in the armed forces, thanks to everybody that are first responders. I appreciate it, and thanks for all of you wonderful people who help fight and preserve our independence on this great Independence Day. You wouldn't think that would be applicable. You wouldn't think that would be applicable. That's not true. I gotta start looking.
You're cute though.